The moment Spencer saw an opportunity, a reason to step away, he took it. No hesitation. He slipped out of the building and made a beeline for his car, moving fast, almost on autopilot. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his hands trembled as he dug into his pocket for the keys. He yanked the door open, threw himself inside, and immediately locked all the doors. Only then did he reach for his phone. The call to emergency services was made within minutes. His voice cracked with panic. There was fear in every word, urgency in every breath. He told the dispatcher exactly what he'd overheard, every detail, every phrase, as close to word for word as he could manage. Then came the hardest part. He said it out loud. He said that Emily Ferrazzo was no longer alive, and that her was still inside the camper he had just come from. Dear viewers, we appreciate your support and comments. It means a lot to us. Thank you for being with us. Emily Ferrazzo entered the world on July 25, 1999, in the peaceful town of Plymouth, nestled in the heart of New Hampshire. From the beginning, she was surrounded by warmth, a family defined by deep-rooted values, unwavering love, and a devotion to each other that shaped Emily into someone remarkably empathetic. Her childhood, while not without its small-town limitations, was filled with laughter, shared meals, quiet holidays, and conversations that encouraged self-reflection and kindness. Those who knew her from a young age often spoke of her remarkable emotional intelligence. How even as a child, she had the ability to comfort others with just a few words. Whether it was a friend going through a rough patch or a sibling dealing with disappointment, Emily always knew what to say, and more importantly, how to be there. Her loyalty was not performative. It was deeply rooted, quiet, and constant. Friends, family, neighbors, all carried stories of her quiet strength and her gentle, listening presence. One of Emily's most defining traits was her profound connection to music. It was more than a pastime for her. It was her sanctuary. Through song, she expressed the corners of her soul that words couldn't quite reach. Her voice was soft, but carried an emotional weight that could silence a room. When she sang, people listened, not because it was loud or flashy, but because it felt honest. Every lyric, every melody that left her lips revealed something about the world as she saw it, tender, layered, and yearning for peace. Music wasn't the only outlet for Emily's compassion. From a young age, she displayed a deep affection for animals, often volunteering at local shelters. She would spend entire afternoons tending to abandoned cats and dogs, speaking to them softly, bringing blankets and treats, brushing their fur, and simply offering the gentle presence they had been denied. It wasn't just a hobby. It was her way of showing love in its most unconditional form. Emily's dreams were quietly poetic. She didn't chase fame, recognition, or material wealth. Instead, she longed for a life rooted in sincerity. A small house filled with laughter, music floating through the air, a garden in the back, and someone to share the quiet with. To her, fulfillment was found in connection, not in status. She believed in the power of trust, mutual respect, and in building a home where peace wasn't just an ideal but a daily reality. It was during one of the most stable, hopeful seasons of her life that Emily met Joseph Ferlazzo. They were introduced through a group of mutual friends during a casual gathering. There was nothing flashy about their first encounter, no cinematic moment, just an ease that felt, to Emily, both rare and refreshing. Their conversation flowed easily, unforced, and warm. Joseph listened more than he spoke, and when he did contribute, his words were thoughtful, deliberate, and carried with them a quiet gentleness. He didn't try to impress. He simply was, and that calm presence drew Emily in. Joseph Ferlazzo, born in 1980, was nearly 2 decades older, but their emotional connection bridged the years between them. He too had grown up in New Hampshire, though he rarely offered specifics about his early life. What he did share painted a picture of someone who had always known how to blend in, someone who understood people and how to keep things smooth on the surface. He'd held various jobs over the years, nothing glamorous, nothing too consistent, but enough to give the impression of experience and adaptability. He mentioned a previous marriage, though never in detail. When Emily asked questions, he would answer vaguely but kindly, then redirect the conversation. She didn't push. Her trusting nature led her to believe that everyone had their reasons for looking ahead instead of back. In those early weeks, Joseph seemed to embrace Emily's world fully. He asked about her music, attended her small performances, offered compliments that felt sincere. He planned thoughtful weekend trips, nothing extravagant, but filled with small moments that made her feel cared for. A walk through a local art gallery, hot cocoa in a tiny cafe, handwritten notes left in her bag. To Emily, this felt like something real. After years of giving so much of herself to others, it felt like she had found someone who wanted to give back. Her friends noticed the glow she carried when she spoke about him. She described Joseph as calm, supportive, and remarkably understanding. They saw her smiling more, humming often, talking about the future in a way she hadn't before. She imagined a life where her values aligned perfectly with someone else's. For once, it seemed possible. Yet not everyone shared her enthusiasm. Her parents, while respectful, had quiet reservations. There was something about Joseph's stillness that felt overly curated to them, like someone always keeping their cards close. He never raised any red flags outright, but the way he deflected questions or how rarely he talked about his own inner world left them uneasy. Emily, ever eager to believe in the good, dismissed these concerns. After all, Joseph had done nothing wrong. He had been kind, attentive, and consistent. What more could she ask for? As their relationship progressed, things continued smoothly on the surface. They spoke often of building a life together, a home filled with books and music, the pitter-patter of pets or maybe children, and a sense of daily peace. But as time went on, faint but unmistakable signs began to emerge. It started with small moments. Joseph, who once praised Emily's thoughts, began occasionally cutting her off mid-sentence, particularly when they disagreed. His corrections weren't loud or cruel, but they carried a sharpness that lingered. He would sometimes dismiss her opinions with a quiet, "You don't understand," or an eye roll that felt more dismissive than teasing. Emily mentioned some of these incidents to her closest friends during long, late-night talks. She didn't frame them as serious concerns, more like things that confused her, things she didn't expect. Her voice would lower when she spoke of them, and sometimes she would trail off, as if unsure of whether she should continue. Her parents picked up on this hesitation and began gently asking more questions. But Emily would often pivot, brush off their concerns, or claim it was just a small disagreement, not worth dwelling on. Still, over the following months, these moments became clearer in pattern. Emily shared that during arguments, Joseph would raise his voice, sometimes criticizing her over small, trivial things. She told herself it was stress, maybe the pressures of work, or perhaps just a rough week. Everyone had those, didn't they? To her, those incidents were nothing more than fleeting outbursts. She didn't want to think they meant anything more, and so she smoothed them over with excuses, brushed them off in conversations, and continued to tell her friends and family that things were normal. But her parents saw past the surface. They had always known their daughter to be bright, resilient, and emotionally attuned. So, when she started dodging certain questions, or when her cheerful updates became noticeably vague, they took notice. Emily spoke with a practiced lightness, but something deeper in her tone betrayed her. Her laughter felt thinner. Her eyes, once filled with certainty, now darted slightly when she tried to reassure them. A kind of quiet fatigue lingered around her, like someone constantly walking on emotional eggshells. Her parents didn't press her. They knew that confronting her directly might only cause her to retreat. She was an adult, after all. Independent, responsible, and proud. She wasn't the kind to accept being treated as fragile or incapable. Still, her parents couldn't shake the feeling that behind her smile was something more complex, something closer to fear than joy. Every now and then, during a quiet conversation over coffee or on a walk around the neighborhood, They would gently ask how things were going. Emily always insisted that everything was fine. She said she could handle the tough moments, that no relationship was perfect, and that Joseph was just going through something. It was never about her. At least, that's what she wanted them to believe. What she didn't say, however, was just as telling as what she did. What Emily kept private was the growing sense of unease at home. Behind closed doors, the warmth she had once believed in was slipping away. Joseph, once so composed and affectionate, had slowly become unpredictable. It wasn't explosive or theatrical. His control came in quieter forms. A tightening of the jaw, a wordless silence that lasted hours, a sharp glance that made her question herself. Over time, he began limiting her routines, subtly changing how and when she communicated with others. Little things at first, questions about who she was texting, passive remarks about her schedule, doubts about her friends. They were framed as concern, but they accumulated like weight on her chest. And soon, Emily found herself doubting her own perspective. Was she overreacting? Was this just how people argued? Wasn't love supposed to involve work, compromise, patience? Joseph never blamed himself. When things felt tense, it was because she misunderstood him. When she tried to explain how something made her feel, he'd twist it gently, making her question her memory or her judgment. He wasn't aggressive in the traditional sense. He was calm, precise, and emotionally distant in a way that made everything feel like it was her fault. Emily began doing what so many do in harmful relationships. She minimized, she rationalized, and she internalized. She clung to the memory of who Joseph had been in the beginning, the supportive, attentive partner who left little love notes and made her feel seen. That version of him still lingered in her mind like a ghost she couldn't give up on. And maybe, deep down, she was already preparing herself to leave. Or maybe she was just waiting for the right moment, the moment she felt strong enough, safe enough, to step away. Until then, she played the part. From the outside, everything still looked perfect. Photos of weekend getaways, smiling selfies, shared meals posted on social media with cute captions. But those images only captured a fraction of the truth. The reality was far more complicated. Joseph wasn't looking for a partner in the true sense. He was looking for control. He needed predictability, compliance. And when he sensed that Emily might be slipping out of that carefully managed script, something inside him shifted. He began acting differently, more calculated, more distant. And when that control truly felt at risk, when Emily seemed to be pulling away, he made a choice. A quiet, final one. When Joseph proposed a short getaway to Vermont, he framed it as a fresh start. A weekend to reset, to breathe, to talk without the noise of their day-to-day lives. Emily, hopeful by nature and always wishing to fix what was broken, agreed. She told herself it might be what they needed, a change of scenery, a chance to reconnect. Her parents were uneasy when she mentioned the trip. They had heard enough to feel worried, even if Emily still insisted that she was fine. She said she was in control, that she knew what she was doing. And her parents, trying not to push her away, said little, though their concern grew with every word she said. On October 15, 2021, Emily and Joseph packed up and left New Hampshire, traveling in a vehicle that towed a small trailer behind it. Joseph had mapped out their route in advance, choosing Bolton, Vermont, a quiet, forested town he knew from years past. He said it would be peaceful, and maybe it would help them remember what mattered. Emily leaned into the planning as a distraction. She organized supplies, double-checked accommodations, and tried to stay hopeful. But as the miles passed and the landscape changed, she felt a quiet tension growing. Joseph spoke little during the drive. His responses were short, his energy oddly distant. Emily chalked it up to travel fatigue, but couldn't shake a growing feeling that something wasn't right. They had also arranged to meet with Joseph's sister, Nicole, and her boyfriend for a casual dinner during the trip, an evening that was supposed to bring some familiarity and warmth. Emily was nervous, but she wanted to make a good impression. When they arrived at the rented apartment that Joseph had booked online, Emily tried her best to seem at ease. She smiled, engaged politely, and chatted with Nicole and her partner as if everything was fine. From the outside, it was a pleasant evening. Casual conversation, polite laughter, shared food. But beneath it all, Emily could feel the subtle strain. Then, without warning, he told Nicole they wouldn't be staying for dinner after all. Nicole and her boyfriend were left standing in confused silence, uncertain of what had gone wrong. They watched the couple walk away, unsure if they had said or done something to offend. But even they could sense that something beneath the surface had shifted, something they couldn't quite name. Emily, as they left, felt that unsettling ripple return, the creeping uncertainty she had tried so hard to quiet over the past few weeks. The evening that was meant to strengthen relationships and offer warmth had ended with an invisible wall forming around her once again. Joseph suggested they spend the night in the camper instead. He said he wanted space, time alone with her, just the two of them, away from others, away from interruptions. Emily hesitated, but only briefly. She didn't want to escalate things. She nodded, smiled faintly, and agreed, even as questions stirred inside her. Her instinct to maintain peace overrode her intuition once more. She told herself it was just a bump, a momentary shadow that would pass with the morning light. Inside the camper that night, the silence was weighty and strange. It wasn't the silence of comfort or rest. It was the kind that hummed with tension, that settled into corners and stretched across the space like fog. They spoke little. Joseph's energy was unreadable, and Emily felt herself slipping into that familiar state of emotional vigilance, carefully weighing every word, every glance, every breath. She wrapped herself in a blanket and tried to steady her thoughts. She looked out the window and watched the dark Vermont landscape blur into silhouettes of trees and sky. She tried to believe that maybe a good night's sleep would soften the air between them. Maybe things would feel lighter in the morning. Maybe the tension would break. But in her heart, she sensed something had already shifted too far to be undone. She had no idea that these final days would not be a time of reconnection, but instead a quiet descent into something irreversible. What was meant to be a retreat became something far more ominous, something quietly final. In the early morning hours, there were no more updates from Emily. The calls stopped. The texts ceased. Her digital presence, once active and steady, went completely silent. The last call her parents received came the following afternoon. It was brief. She sounded composed but vague, as if reading from a script. She told them that everything was fine, that she and Joseph were planning to head home soon. She used words that suggested normalcy, but her voice, usually rich with warmth and nuance, felt flat, too calm, too controlled. And beneath that calmness, her parents heard something else. Not quite panic, but something close. Resignation, maybe. A subtle tremble in her tone she hadn't intended to reveal. When the call ended, both of Emily's parents looked at one another in silence. They didn't speak right away, but in their hearts, they both felt the same cold truth. Something wasn't right. Something was very wrong. As hours passed with no further word, concern turned to anxiety. Then came the first full day without any contact, then another, and another. By the third day, her parents could no longer wait in silence. They began calling everyone they could think of, friends, co-workers, even reaching out to Joseph directly. When they finally got a hold of him, he sounded calm. Too calm. He said that Emily had left, that after a disagreement, she had walked away on her own. According to him, she had called someone for a ride and simply decided not to return. He offered no details, no location, no timeline. Just the same phrase repeated again and again. She left. I don't know where she went. Emily's parents were stunned. The story didn't make sense. Their daughter wouldn't just vanish, Not without a word, not without checking in. And she certainly wouldn't leave without telling someone. They knew her. She was thoughtful, consistent, grounded. Something in Joseph's tone didn't sit right. There was no urgency in his voice, no worry, just bland indifference, like someone describing a forgotten item at the grocery store. Still, he stuck to the same version of events. When law enforcement got involved, prompted by the family's immediate missing person report, Joseph gave them the same account. Calm, unemotional, like he had rehearsed it. But for Emily's parents, his story only deepened their concern. They didn't believe it, not for a moment. And that growing dread only intensified with every hour that passed with no sign of their daughter. Joseph, meanwhile, carried on as though nothing serious had occurred. He returned to his daily routines. He answered calls with dispassionate repetition. He showed no outward emotion, no distress, no grief, no confusion. And the more he spoke, the more Emily's family became convinced that he was hiding something. Then, just as the investigation stalled and emotions ran high, a phone call came through, one that changed everything. The caller was a man named Spencer Lemon. His voice was unsteady, his words strained. He told dispatch that he had recently spoken with Joseph and that the interaction had deeply unsettled him. Spencer wasn't a close friend of Joseph's. Their relationship was loose and casual, more acquaintances than companions. They had occasionally helped each other out with tasks, favors, and odd errands, but there had never been a deep connection. A few days earlier, Spencer said, Joseph had contacted him and asked for a ride. He needed to return to the camper in St. Albans, claiming he had left some things behind and didn't have a way to get there himself. Spencer, unaware of any tension or context, agreed to help. He thought little of it, just another favor in a series of mundane interactions. On the way to the camper, Joseph barely spoke. His usual small talk was absent. He stared out the window, expression unreadable. Spencer, sensing the unusual silence, began to feel increasingly uneasy. Something was off. As they approached the wooded area where the camper had been parked, Joseph's demeanor shifted. He began fidgeting, his body language more anxious, more restless. Spencer watched him closely, uncertain of what to say, but certain that something wasn't right. Finally, unable to hold back, Spencer asked, "What happened out here?" Joseph turned to him with unsettling calm. His voice was low, measured, and chilling in its simplicity. "She's gone," he said flatly. Spencer blinked, confused. "Gone? What do you mean?" Joseph looked straight ahead and replied, "Emily's not alive anymore." Silence followed. Spencer's pulse quickened. He tried to make sense of what he'd just heard. His stomach twisted with confusion, fear, disbelief. Desperately, he asked again, "Did you do something to her?" Joseph didn't flinch. His response was immediate. One word. "Yes?" And in that single, unshaken admission, Spencer understood the gravity of the situation. He wasn't just giving someone a ride anymore. He was sitting beside a man who had just calmly confessed to something that would soon unravel into a full-scale investigation. Spencer didn't ask any more questions after hearing Joseph's haunting admission. His instincts told him it was safer not to press further. As soon as he saw an opening, an excuse to leave, a moment where Joseph turned away, Spencer slipped out. He didn't run or shout. He walked briskly to his vehicle, his mind racing, his hands trembling as he fumbled for the keys. Once inside, he locked the doors and started the engine with shaking fingers. The tires kicked up gravel as he sped away from the site, each second feeling like an eternity until he had enough distance to breathe again. Only then did he reach for his phone. The call to emergency services was made within minutes. His voice was breathless, tight with fear, and laced with urgency. He explained as clearly as he could what he had just heard. He tried to recall the exact words, the exact phrasing, so that nothing would be misunderstood. He told the dispatcher that Joseph had made a chilling statement. that Emily was gone and that Her was inside the camper they had just visited. This was no longer speculation or suspicion. It was a direct statement, an admission that Emily had lost her life and that Joseph had played a central role in whatever had happened. For law enforcement, Spencer's report marked the first undeniable breakthrough in a case that had, until that moment, rested on uncertainty and conflicting narratives. Up to that point, all they had was Joseph's vague and emotionless account, which offered no real evidence and lacked any clear accountability. But now, with a credible witness reporting an unsolicited confession, the situation changed instantly. Authorities responded without delay. Spencer's call gave them the legal grounds to act. They secured a warrant to search the camper and began preparing to take Joseph into custody for questioning. Officers were dispatched to the site in St. Albans with a clear sense of purpose. No one was prepared, however, for what they would find when they arrived. The interior of the camper was quiet, still, and meticulously arranged. At first glance, nothing appeared out of place. But a closer look told a different story. Investigators found evidence that contradicted Joseph's previous claims of innocence. Though efforts had clearly been made to scrub the space clean, there were signs, small but significant, of deliberate attempts to sanitize and conceal. Subtle traces, missed corners, chemical odors. Enough to raise immediate alarm. When law enforcement located Joseph, he did not resist. He appeared calm, even cooperative, and voluntarily agreed to go to the station for an interview. From the beginning, it was clear he intended to tell a version of events that would cast himself in a more sympathetic light. During the recorded interview, Joseph began painting a picture of a rocky relationship, one filled with frequent disagreements and growing emotional distance. He claimed that tensions had been building for some time, that Emily had talked about leaving, and that he hadn't known how to handle it. At first, his story framed what happened as a tragic misunderstanding. He spoke slowly, deliberately, offering details that seemed carefully selected. But investigators were trained to spot inconsistencies, and it didn't take long for cracks to appear in his story. When officers brought up the information provided by Spencer, the direct confession Joseph had made just days earlier, his demeanor shifted. The calm front began to erode. Forced to acknowledge that Spencer had reported his words, Joseph hesitated. He admitted, finally, that he had told Spencer something like that. But what followed was not remorse. It was a defense, a rationalization. He claimed he hadn't meant for anything to happen, that everything spiraled during a heated moment. He told detectives that he and Emily had argued late into the night and that he had tried to walk away. But something inside him, he said, just snapped. What followed was a chillingly dispassionate description. Joseph told officers that after their final exchange, he sat in silence for several minutes, thinking through his options. He eventually walked over to a locked cabinet, opened it, and removed a firearm. Afterward, he didn't call for help. He didn't report what happened. Instead, he began cleaning. Every surface, every object, every inch of the camper was wiped down, scrubbed, and sanitized. He checked corners, examined the floor, and methodically tried to erase every visible trace of what had occurred. According to his own words, he moved with purpose. No visible emotion, no visible breakdown. To investigators, this admission was both revealing and disturbing. There was no remorse in Joseph's tone, no regret. He spoke with clinical detachment, not the shaken tone of someone grappling with a grave mistake. Detectives listening to the recorded interview began to see the case more clearly. They no longer viewed Joseph as a man caught in a moment of chaos. They now understood him as someone who had made a series of deliberate, calculated decisions. And perhaps most unsettling of all was what happened after the incident. Joseph did not flee. He didn't try to leave town or go into hiding. In the days following Emily's disappearance, he returned to the same camper again and again. Each night, he stayed there, sleeping in the very space where his secret was hidden. During the day, he mingled with locals, visited shops, and spoke with acquaintances. He smiled, made small talk, and went about his routine as if nothing had happened. He met with people who had no idea what he was carrying with him. They spoke of everyday topics, weather, errands, minor frustrations, and never once betrayed that he was the central figure in a growing missing persons case. Investigators were able to confirm that Joseph remained near the scene throughout that period. He made no attempts to dispose of evidence beyond what he had already done. He didn't attempt to flee across state lines or assume a new identity. Instead, he chose to stay still, to act as if life had not changed. This, to detectives, was one of the most chilling aspects of the case. In later, more revealing conversations with investigators, Joseph finally admitted what many had already suspected. His calm, composed behavior in the days following Emily's disappearance wasn't the result of shock or emotional shutdown. It was calculated. He confessed that he had been deliberately trying to act as though nothing had happened. His goal, he claimed, was to avoid suspicion by maintaining a perfect facade of normalcy. According to him, the key was simple. Don't change your routine, don't panic, and most importantly, don't show anything on your face. He even disclosed that he had developed a backup narrative in case anyone questioned him. In his mind, this fabricated story would be enough to satisfy any curiosity and would keep people from digging deeper. But this behavior wasn't random or isolated. As investigators and psychologists later pointed out, Joseph's pattern of control had long been evident. His history with Emily, once viewed by outsiders as a quiet and private relationship, was slowly revealed to be something much more troubling. His aggression hadn't just come out during moments of stress, it followed a deliberate structure. Whenever Emily demonstrated independence, whether it was spending time with friends, expressing doubts about the relationship, or even voicing her needs, Joseph responded with hostility masked as concern. To him, any sign of distance was an attack on his authority. Over time, Emily began to pull away. She confided in her parents more frequently, describing situations that didn't sit right with her. She spoke not of fear exactly, but of discomfort, anxiety, unease, and a growing sense that she couldn't quite be herself anymore. Joseph noticed the change, and for someone who had come to define his self-worth through dominance and control, the possibility of losing that grip was not something he could tolerate. This wasn't about heartbreak. It wasn't about being left behind by someone he loved. It was about losing the power he believed he deserved. As the case progressed, these elements became central to the legal proceedings. When the court proceedings finally began, the courtroom was heavy with tension. The prosecution laid out their case with clear, methodical precision. Each piece of evidence was presented not in isolation, but as part of a wider pattern. Joseph's interviews were replayed. His contradictions were highlighted. His moments of calculated calm were contrasted with the timeline of Emily's disappearance. It became clear that his behavior had not been reactive, but intentional. Prosecutors argued confidently and firmly that the crime had not been spontaneous or accidental, but premeditated. They showed how his actions before, during, and especially after the event demonstrated a clear attempt to conceal the truth. His rehearsed tone, his return to the camper, his failure to report Emily missing, his mechanical cleanup, his lack of remorse. All of it pointed to a mind that had planned, not panicked. Expert testimony added weight to the argument. Forensic professionals described the evidence found in the camper, as well as the lengths taken to sanitize the space. Joseph's defense tried to present a very different narrative. His legal team attempted to frame the relationship as mutually dysfunctional. He claimed Emily had often been argumentative, that their last night together had been filled with tension. He insisted again and again that what happened wasn't something he had planned. He described it as a moment of emotional overwhelm, a situation that escalated beyond his control. But in the courtroom, those words failed to carry weight, not just because of the evidence, but because of the absence of credibility. Joseph Ferlazzo's account lacked empathy. His answers lacked humanity. And with every hour that passed, it became more and more clear that his version of events couldn't explain the depth of planning and the coldness of execution. Closing arguments were made with solemn force, The prosecution reminded the jury that the case wasn't just about what had been done. It was about who had done it and why. It wasn't a moment of passion. It was a calculated decision by someone who couldn't tolerate losing control. When the jury returned after deliberations, the courtroom held its collective breath. The verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The judge issued a sentence of 42 years in prison.